Today, I want to talk about what happened to Wesley. If you don't know, if this is the first time you're clicking on my video, or if this is the first time you've seen me, or maybe you just don't know, I had a 2-year-old son, Wesley. He passed away in November of 2023, and talking about his death isn't something that I typically do. Over this past year, I feel like I have talked about like my mental health a little bit and talking about what grief is like, but I haven't really ever talked about his death. This is something that I don't even talk about in my personal life with friends or family. The only person who really truly sees me grieve is my husband, Cameron. He's like the only person I feel like really gets it, because Wesley was our son. We lost our child. I feel like the story of his passing is something that I hold really close to my chest, and it's something that I think about all of the time. The day he passed away is something that plays in my head over and over a lot. I always told myself that I would be ready to share the story when I could tell it without crying. But the truth is I don't think that I'll ever be able to talk about what happened to Wesley without crying. So if I cry at any point, please bear with me. But also, I feel like to start like this new layer of healing, I kind of have to let go of some of it. And by talking about it and like putting it out into the universe, I feel like that might help take some of the burden off. It's always hard to make a video about this because it feels so final, and I always feel like there's more I could have said, or I could have worded something differently, but this is gonna be my best shot. This is what happened to my son Wesley. To put it like very plainly, Wesley had a heart attack. He was 2 years old. He had just turned 2. He passed away 28 days after his 2nd birthday. And he had a heart attack on November 10th of 2023. But this story really starts at his 18-month checkup. They say hindsight is 20/20, but in my case, hindsight is an evil bitch who likes to haunt me at night. At Wesley's 18-month checkup, he saw a different pediatrician. So his normal pediatrician, who he had seen since he was a baby, was out on maternity leave. So he saw a different doctor. During this visit, she was listening to his heart and lungs, and she asked me if Wesley had ever been diagnosed with a heart murmur. And he hadn't. I have never had any concerns about his heart. His other pediatrician, his normal pediatrician, never brought up anything about his heart. Wesley also had to stay a few nights in the hospital a few months previous to his 18-month checkup because he had a really bad stomach bug and he was severely dehydrated, so they kept him a few nights in the hospital. He actually ended up having like some strand of E. coli that was causing the stomach bug. And even at that hospital visit, they weren't concerned about his heart, and he was hooked up to, monitors, and they were taking his vitals all the time. So this was the first time that any doctor has ever raised concerns about his heart. During this visit, she said that something sounded off about the murmur, that she didn't feel comfortable just saying that it was a murmur, and that she wanted to refer us to cardiology. We couldn't get into the cardiologist until like a month and a half later. He saw the cardiologist at the end of June or the beginning of July. I can't exactly remember. And if there's one person that I could really throat kick, like if there's one person that I'm pretty angry at, it is the cardiologist. I take Wesley to the cardiologist. They do an echo and an EKG, and they do his blood pressure, take his vitals, all of it. They do it all. And the cardiologist comes in and he's talking to me, and he says that it sounds like Wesley has a little bit of a murmur, but he wasn't too concerned about the way his heart sounded, and that Wesley's heart was a little bit thicker than normal, but again, it wasn't something that he was concerned about, and that the only thing that the cardiologist was concerned about was Wesley's blood pressure. During the visit, Wesley had elevated blood pressure. I can't exactly remember what the blood pressure was, but that was the only thing that the doctor was concerned about. The thing about Wesley is he was nervous around doctors. What baby isn't anxious every time they go to the doctor? I mean, at this point in their life, all they know is like getting shots every time they go to the doctor. And he was low-key traumatized by the visit he had when he had E. coli, because he was so dehydrated they couldn't find a vein, so they had to do like an ultrasound in his arm to get like a deep vein. That, ever since that visit, every time he went to the doctor, he was like, no, take me out of here. So he was anxious when they took his blood pressure, and the cardiologist recommended that I take Wesley back to his pediatrician in 2 weeks to get his blood pressure rechecked to see if it was normal. But in my mom brain, I'm like, that's not going to work because he's anxious around doctors. I take him back to the pediatrician. His blood pressure is more than likely going to be elevated. So I thought it would be a better decision to buy a at-home blood pressure monitor. This is what the cardiologist sent me home with. And the only thing that he was concerned about is he wanted the top number to be below 100. At 100 or around 100 or below 100 would be perfect. And if it was over that consistently, then to bring him back in. But if it was normal, if it was fine, not to worry about it, and that there was nothing to cause concerns. So I took Wesley's blood pressure kind of randomly. There was really no system to taking his blood pressure, and every time it was normal except this one time, but I'm pretty sure he was crying when I took that blood pressure. But every time it was fine. And in my head, and where I'm kind of upset with myself, is that I didn't get a second opinion. How do I take my son to the cardiologist in July and then he has a heart attack 4 months later? How does that happen? I can't wrap my head around that. Which leads us to the day Wesley passed away, which was November 10th of 2023. This is usually the part in the story that I fall apart and that I start to cry. The day Wesley passed away was November 10th. It was a Friday. And the thing about Wesley is he was not a morning person. He gets that from me. I am also not a morning person. I equate Wesley to an adult in the morning who needs their cup of coffee. Like, don't talk to them without their cup of coffee. Wesley was, don't talk to him until he's had his morning bottle and at least 30 minutes to adjust to being awake. So our morning routine was I would wake up, change his diaper, make him a bottle, sit him on the couch, let him watch some Blippi, and I would go do my morning routine. I would go make a cup of coffee. And at this point, my book talk was taking off, and I think specifically at this point in time, I had just finished Iron Flame. So I think I made some videos talking about Iron Flame, made my cup of coffee. I go and sit on the couch next to Wesley, and the first thing that I notice is that he's not drinking his bottle. The second thing that I notice is that he looks really sleepy. Like, he looks like he's ready to take a nap, which was strange because we had literally just woken up. So I sat down on the floor in front of him, and I'm just kind of like looking at him, and I'm feeling like something is off. And I notice that his breathing is kind of strange. Like, he's breathing like a... And then I noticed that the vein in his neck was really beating. Like, you could see the whole, like, his whole neck on both sides was like beating very visibly. And that really freaked me out. But I can be a little bit of a hypochondriac. A lot of my anxiety revolves around health related things, and there has been points with Wesley where I have been a little dramatic. So I FaceTime my sister, who is an ER nurse, and I'm like showing her what's happening, and she told me that that was not normal and that it was actually really concerning and that I needed to take him to the ER immediately. And that like, okay girl, that freaked me out. And at this point I was like texting his pediatrician. There was this app that you could message his pediatrician through, and I was like messaging, like, do I take him to his pediatrician or do I take him to fucking urgent care? Like, I didn't think at this moment that he was dying. I didn't know that that was the beginning of the end. Decide to take him to the emergency room, and thank God Cameron was home. My husband works shift work, and he at this point in time worked a lot of overtime. He was on the night shift, so he was still sleeping, and he was home. So I went and woke him up, and I said, we need to take Wesley to the emergency room. So Cameron gets up. I'm packing like a little hospital bag with diapers and wipe and extra bottle, you know, some toys. It's when Cameron came out of the bedroom and picked Wesley up is where things really started to change. Like, something was really, really wrong, because Wesley kind of went limp. To me in the moment, it looked like he was having some sort of like absent seizure. That's the only thing that I can explain it. Like, he was still awake, he was still breathing, his eyes were open, but like he couldn't hold his head up, and he kind of just like went limp. And Cameron was like, oh my God, we need to go right now. And he's like going to put him in his car seat. And I'm like, Cameron, there's absolutely no way that I'm driving like this with him in the back seat. Like, there's no way that I'm just gonna sit in the car with him like this. So I ended up calling an ambulance instead. We were trying to get Wesley's attention, but he couldn't focus on anything. It took probably like 5 to 10 minutes for the ambulance to show up. And it was an ambulance, a fire truck, and a police officer came to our house. And I remember thinking, like, if only Wesley could tell, because he loved, you know, fire trucks and ambulances. Like, he loved cars, or like any like working trucks. He was really into like anything that had wheels or anything that had a motor and made noises. That was what Wesley was really into. And I remember thinking, like, only if he could tell, he would be so excited. But you know, they get him into the ambulance, and since we were at our house and we had our car seat, you know, they asked us to grab the car seat and take that with us. So they're strapping him in his car seat. And as we were pulling out of our driveway is when he stopped breathing. And if I really think, where did my grief start? It was in that moment. I will never forget it. Like, we had just spent maybe like 3 minutes strapping him into this fucking car seat, and as we're like finally starting to move, he's ripping him out of his car seat, and he flings his car seat over. And I remember there was like a strap that like hit me in the face, and I remember being like, whoa, what's happening? And he looked at me and he said, your son's not breathing. And like that was such an outer body experience, because it's like a whoa. What do you mean? There was a part of me that was really happy that I made the decision to call an ambulance, because I remember thinking, like, thank God I called an ambulance, because he's in medical care. Like, he's in immediate medical care. You should be able to bring him back, right? He's only 2. Nothing's wrong with him that I knew at that moment. Thankfully, we have a hospital that's like 5 minutes down the road. So we got to the hospital quite quickly, and they started CPR on him, and they performed CPR for an hour, and nothing worked. They were giving him like all of these medicines, and they were doing like ultrasounds of his heart to see if there was any activity. And they were doing everything that they could, but nothing worked. I have never felt more helpless. The chaoticness, the way I felt, just, I don't even know how to describe it. I felt like I was going fucking crazy. Watching people perform CPR on my 2-year-old son. It was terrible. That's why I don't think I'll ever be able to tell this story without crying, because it was the worst day of my life. I remember like feeling like I had to do something. Like I couldn't just sit there and watch. Cameron was kind of like stuck there, like he couldn't move. He wanted to be in the room. But I kept going in and out. Like I would leave the room and I would call like all of our family, like my mom's sister, Cameron's mom, his family, because we live in Louisiana with Cameron's family. My family is in South Carolina. And I'm kind of calling everyone, letting them know like, hey, we had to take Wesley to the ER. He's not breathing. When I called all of Cameron's family, you know, they were immediately on their way to the hospital. And at this point, they were still performing CPR. And, like, I didn't know what to do. So I went back in the room, and I'm sitting there. And I'm watching the nurses' faces. I think there was, like, 6, 7 nurses. And there was a doctor at, like, the head of the table. And, I remember just watching their faces, and it was like around the 30-minute mark. They performed CPR on him for an hour. I don't know if I said that, but it was like around the 30-minute mark that, you know, they're kind of like looking around, and like the doctor is asking like, is there something we're not thinking of? Come on, people, like think of what aren't we thinking of? And the nurses kind of are like, I could just tell. I could tell that he wasn't coming back. I remember the doctor coming over to me and Cameron, and he, you know, he's trying to talk to us. But in my head, I'm like, what the fuck just happened? All of Cameron's family arrived at the hospital, and Cameron couldn't leave the room. Like, Cameron wanted to stay in the room, so I went and I got all of his family. We stayed in the room with Wesley as long as we could until the coroners showed up, and there was a few detectives who showed up, and I think that's just standard protocol for any, I think it's like, I don't remember the age, I think it's like any child under the age of 3 or something like that, they have to open an investigation, which is totally fine. I understand. I can get why they do that. So they take us into like this, it's I guess like the little chapel area of the ER, and you know, they're asking us questions, and I'm like still in my head, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? The moment I realized that there was something wrong with Wesley, he had died an hour later, and then they performed CPR on him for an hour, and in those 2 hours completely derailed my life. The detectives ended up coming to our house, and you know, they took pictures and stuff, and that was it. That was it. Next, I want to talk about the autopsy findings, and this is what makes me the angriest. Like, in my grief, whenever I'm truly angry, is when I'm thinking about the autopsy report. I think we got the autopsy report, I think maybe like a week after he passed away. He had already had his service, and he had already been cremated when we got the autopsy report. And his official cause of death, on his death certificate, it says cardiac dysrhythmia due to hypertensive heart disease due to idiopathic hypertension. And then I looked further into his autopsy findings, specifically at his heart. All of his other organs and stuff, totally normal. His heart weighed 136 grams, which an average toddler heart at 2 years of age, heart weighs 52 grams. So his heart was double the weight of an average toddler heart. And in the reports under his heart, it said that the dysrhythmia was caused by a diagnosed hypertensive heart disease. when I read that, diagnosed hypertensive heart disease, I almost drove to the cardiologist. And like, I don't even know, girl. The fuck do you mean diagnosed? Diagnosed to who? Not to me. You didn't diagnose anything to me. Diagnosed hypertensive heart disease? What the fuck do you mean by that? In my head, I'm like, how did he have hypertensive heart disease? That doesn't make any sense. I checked his blood pressure. His blood pressure was totally fine. And if when we went to the cardiologist, if he found something was wrong with his heart, hypertensive heart disease, you're telling me diagnosed, that makes me think that it was in his medical records. Why wasn't he on medicine? Why wasn't I in contact with the cardiologist? Why weren't we on some sort of treatment plan? And I tried to go into Wesley's medical records, but what's weird about it is I lost access to Wesley's medical records. Like, it feels like the moment he died. They like went in and like denied my access. I know this because I sent a message to his pediatrician through, like, we have this app called My Chart. I sent them a message before we went to the ER, and they messaged me back when we were at the hospital. And I remember like going home and trying to check the message, and my access was already gone. And I called the cardiologist and I was like, hi, I would like to get access to my son's medical records. And they were like, okay, we'll fax you over this paper. And they would never fax me over the paper. I think I called him like 3 or 4 times, like, hey, I'm trying to get access to my son's medical records. And they would always be like, okay, we're gonna fax you over the paper. And I'm like, they never ended up faxing me the paper. It just got to be a lot. And in my grief, I just felt like I couldn't continue this back and forth, because I talked myself out of it, because it was like, what would it make a difference? It's not gonna make a difference. My son has passed away. And in my heart, I feel like the cardiologist fucked up, truly. Like, that's one person that really makes me angry. But what am I gonna do, you know? I can't prove it. I can't prove that it's medical malpractice, although that's what it feels like. Also, something that was reported in the autopsy report is that it was not a congenital heart defect. Like, what happened to his heart was not congenital, which makes me feel better, because at first I was like, well, then how did his pediatrician not catch this? How did the doctors, when he stayed overnight with his stomach bug, not catch this? Like, there were so many moments that a doctor should have catch it. How did I not catch this? How did I not know my son had a heart problem? My sister works with a bunch of doctors, and she was talking to a heart specialist. I'm pretty sure that's who she was talking to. A doctor who knows a lot about hearts. And there's just so many things that could have happened. And I don't know how much I believe his final diagnosis, hypertensive heart disease. That just doesn't make sense to me. Also, why the fuck is his heart so damn big? Does hypertensive heart disease cause your heart to be enlarged? My sister's doctor said that there's just so many things that could have happened. He could have got a virus that made his heart grow. There's something called hypertonic cardiomyopathy that could have made his heart grow, but that disease is genetic, and I don't have a history of that in my family, and Cameron doesn't have a history of heart problems in his family. Like, that doesn't make sense to be hypertonic cardiomyopathy. And there's studies coming out that COVID can cause your heart to grow. There's just so many things that could have happened. And at the end of the day, my son died. And I could drive myself crazy. And there have been nights where I have drove myself crazy trying to think about what happened. But it's not going to change anything. If you're a mom watching this video, I don't mean to freak you out. I'm sure there's a part of you that, you know, is a little paranoid. That's the mom brain for you. I remember hearing stories about kids pass away when I had Wesley, and I remember like my heart breaking and thinking like, oh my God, what if that happened to Wesley? I think it's only human to kind of put yourself in those shoes. And some of the questions I've gotten is, did I notice, like, were there any signs? And when I look back on it, I think I could tell that there was a decline like the last month. But in my head, I thought that it was terrible twos. A lot of the things that I look back on now could have been mistaken. They were mistaken for just normal development, I guess. The biggest thing, and the thing that makes me really angry at myself, Wesley didn't want to walk anymore. Like, the last 2 weeks of his life, he like didn't want to walk. Like, usually if we went to the store, I would take him out of his car seat and put him on the floor and he would walk inside, but he like stopped wanting to do that. But then I would Google that, and it would say that this is sometimes a normal toddler regression. Like, sometimes toddlers will hit regression stages, and it's common for toddlers to like want to be carried places. And so that's what I thought was happening. His activity levels kind of dropped, and he was a little bit, he didn't want to play as much. He kind of just wanted to watch videos on the iPad. He called it a pad. I thought he was just growing, and that maybe he was showing signs of regression. I never thought that he was dying. That's what happened. If you've made it this far in the video, damn, that was a tough one. This was a tough video. I don't share this story for sympathy. I struggle sometimes talking about what happened to Wesley because I don't want to come off like, this sounds stupid to say out loud, but I don't want to come off like I'm broken or like I'm fragile. So I don't tell this story to have sympathy, and I don't want a bunch of I'm sorry's in the comments. I know that, you know, it's hard to think of like something to say in this situation. But I would rather you just listen to me talk, than comment, you're sorry, I'm sorry. Like, I get it. Thank you for your condolences. But it makes me feel strange to have a bunch of people tell me that they're sorry. Which is, it sounds stupid, but it's true. This is part of my story. It is like shaping who I am going to be. I want what happened to Wesley not to completely destroy me, but to give me motivation to live my life in a meaningful way. That is a choice that I have to make, because it is so easy to kind of like sit in this like hurt, in this anger, and it would be so easy to let it destroy me. But I don't want that. Wesley wouldn't want that. And I keep telling myself, even in Wesley's death, he makes me want to be better. And in some days, that's so hard. That's so hard to be better, because I feel confused. I feel lost. I was a stay-at-home mom with Wesley, and when he died, I was just a person who stayed home, and I clinged on to my book talk for dear life. It was like the distraction that I needed, and I don't know what I would have done without. I kind of want to make another video kind of talking about this past year and like what that grief has like truly looked like, but I feel like in order to kind of get to that, I needed to tell the story of what happened first. I have lots of plans for me and myself and my life, and for this channel specifically, and I feel like this story needed to be told for me to get to where I'm going, and that'll make more sense in the future for me and you. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you. Saying thank you feels weird. Thank you for listening. I don't really know what else to say. Your support is everything to me. I don't know what I would do without it. You guys are the best thing in my life right now. I guess I'll stop yapping and say, that's all I have for you guys today. Until next time. Okay, bye. Love you.